I'll start. I'll come up here and do your. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the EEAI conference. Yay! My name is Stephanie. I'm going to be introducing Allison here. And
This is Kevin McCurdy too.
Kevin McCurdy. So they are going to be talking about incorporating meaningful sustainability into your facility. Making your facility as sustainable as your programs can be tough, especially on a budget. Learn how Cope Environmental Center works with community partners to create a space built with meaningful stories and sustainable practices. Take away tips you can use with any facility, old or new. Alison Zajdel owns Zajdel Consulting and spends her time writing grant proposals, training new fundraising professionals, managing projects, and whatever else is needed by her clients. While serving as a primary fundraiser for Cope Environmental Center, she received her certificate in fundraising management from IU's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, while also being trained in marketing, plan giving, capital campaigns, grant writing, board development, and other areas of fundraising and nonprofit management. Recent accomplishments include managing Cope's first major capital campaign for Indiana's Certified Living Building Challenge project. Allison serves as a resiliency coordinator through Earth Charter Indiana and is past chair of the Richmond Environmental Sustainability Commission. She volunteers for a wide variety of community organizations and events. She graduated from DePaul University in 2001 and currently lives. The woohoo was not here, by the way.
It was.
So.
You just
And currently lives in Richmond with her husband Kyle and two children, Maggie and Joel. I also want to say that she served on the EEAI board for many years, and she is the new official president coming in. So welcome, Allison and Kevin.
So maybe Kevin, you want to say just a few words
Yes.
about yourself and maybe your history that links you to. I'm all about the connections this weekend. So how you are linked to this facility.
Sure. So the reason for my move to DePaul is I went to Wabash College. Kind of a pretty hard rivalry there. So I did a biology degree. I graduated in '99. I was actually a naturalist in the state park in the summer of '99. I lived in the campground. So that's my connection to this place. The following summer, I was a naturalist at the Cope Environmental Center. And then a whole long series of good or bad choices. Time will tell. I became an architect and kind of moved away from that. So, and was ultimately the architect for the project we're going to talk about. So I'm happy to talk about any of that stuff as we go. I mean, to me, the fascinating thing is that the biology degree and the architecture degree, they're just systems, inputs and outputs. I mean, so all of that biology training ultimately has helped on the architecture side and understanding kind of those connections that happen between the building and the outside environment. So that's me. Thank you.
Want to tell them why they got these?
Yeah, so we're starting with a quiz. So this little light switch, seems fairly innocuous. The question is, and you got about like 30 seconds to give an answer. How many parts are on this thing? How many parts do you count? I'm timing with my fake watch.
Probably about
50? Feels a little heavy, but
25.
That's a darn good question. What is inside? Oh, I can't read that. Bifocals. All right, so what do we come up with? 23. Okay.
Other thoughts?
Anybody?
10.
10. I feel like these are guesses. So I guess the real question is, who counted the label? Anybody? All right, who counted the glue that holds the label on? The reason I ask these questions, the actual number you came up with are kind of a little bit irrelevant for the purposes of this. We actually came up with, between the two of us, somewhere between 16 and 20. And that's not knowing what's inside 100%, which is a great question. But that's the interesting challenge about anything we do when we talk about sustainability, is a lot of times you're talking about black box stuff that you have no idea what's inside of this. And that has been one of the big challenges, really saying, is this sustainable what we're doing or is it not? And then what metric are you using to what of this thing are you counting? And so how do you get to that kind of end goal? What does sustainability really mean? You're talking about building all these parts that go into it. So that was one of the lessons we learned, because ultimately with LVC, you do have to go through and account for every little part, adhesives, everything you can imagine that goes into a building. So that was to get us thinking about this whole process a little more.
And this is the reason why you got a quiz to start off the day, because
Yes.
Karen probably knows. Karen's the executive director of Coke Environmental Center. I've been gone for 4 years. Kevin and I have been gone for a while, but Jim used to leave a pine cone or something on your desk, and then the next time he was around, you should have identified that. I'm an art major, so I don't identify pine cones. I'm terrible at it. I love pine cones, but so this is our tribute to Jim, is that you started off the session with a quiz. You can go on to the next slide. This is your slide.
So again, this idea of kind of this life cycle analysis. This is really what drives everything. So I think there's this idea of, is it LEED? Is it this? Is it that? Those are really just rating systems that are ultimately trying to help you answer some of these questions. So again, a lot of times what you start to think about is, all right, what am I going to go buy off the shelf and put in my building? And is that material self-sustainable? The reality is you really need to look at this from the point of things are coming out of the ground, they're being transported somewhere, they're being assembled, there's heating and cooling associated with this. There are all these other factors associated with that. So really, when you're looking at products that go into the building as well as the building itself, you need to be thinking all the way from the ground, stuff coming out of the ground, out of the woods, wherever it comes from, and that transportation into the building. So that's that life cycle analysis that you're really looking at. And so there's a lot of buzzwords that get tied up in this, and to me, it's not important to know what all those definitions are. It's kind of where when you hear the word, what to think about or look for. This idea of embodied carbon. So that's really the thing that everybody talks about when it's how much fuel does it take to drive there. I burned an amount of fuel and put some carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This idea of CO2 that's being generated, that's what embodied carbon is all about. So again, it's not just what is the literal carbon that's in that piece of wood, for instance, the fibers in it. It is what did it take to harvest it, to mill it, to transport it, to probably transport it 3 or 4 times between processes, get it to the site and actually install it in the building. All of those steps ultimately add up to the embodied carbon within whatever piece of material that is. So you need to be thinking a little more holistically about it when you think about what is the impact of my products and building on the environment.
So then the other half of it is not only what's the energy side, what's the energy consumption, what's the carbon side of things, is why don't we actually know what's in it? Why don't you know what's in this? There's probably some type of toxin that actually is painted on here to make this rust proof too. There's adhesives in here that you probably shouldn't be breathing. Why don't we know that stuff? And we don't. So the process that we're going to tell you about was all about learning that. So I took a picture last night of my of this morning's oatmeal. I know exactly what's in that, and legally they have to tell me what's in that. So why don't we know what's in the stuff that we're breathing and the things that we're touching? We don't know that at this point. So you can go on to the next slide. So there are 2 programs, and Kevin's going to tell you a little bit more snapshot though, because we're trying to keep our this part short. Most people know about LEED. Does everybody in this room know about LEED certification, a building certification called LEED? So Best Buy around the corner is LEED certified. There are a lot of LEED certified buildings. The one we went with actually was Living Building Challenge. We were in 2.0 or 2.1, one of those, can't remember. But this one is a little more holistic. So you want to give them a snapshot of those 2?
Yeah, and again, these aren't the only 2 systems. I'm sure everybody's, there's globes, there's all these, there's these other systems that kind of come and go and try to, do a little bit better and tweak things that are wrong in some of the other systems, which is typically just missing or in some way not emphasized. Yeah, this talks about it.
Yeah, I wanted to do that so they can see a perspective of the other systems.
That when we started the Coke project, I'll use this as a basis. We, at this point in our firm, had done quite a few LEED projects. Now, this would have been back in like LEED 2, and now we're up to LEED 4, so it continues to evolve. But you can actually see from this pretty well that at that time, and still is the case, LEED was really here in the middle of high performance. So what this is looking at is you're building on a spectrum of, here is code compliance. It's not going to fall down. It's not going to mold. It's not going to hurt people, you know, those types of things. What's the bare code minimum to get a structure built? As you move along this direction, you move into kind of high performance, sustainability, and then restorative. Restorative is actually where it's regenerating, you know, environmental spaces, you know, for wildlife and things like that. So that is the spectrum. At the time we started this project, and this is a conversation we have with anybody who wants to undertake a sustainable building, because sustainable can mean a whole heck of a lot of things. On that spectrum, and I blame this on Jim and Helen Cope in a good way, the goal was really to be out here, how close to that edge can we get? Now you've got to remember, just for context, this conversation started in 2008. So, I mean, at that point, LBC was like a year or two old. I mean, living building challenge. So the idea of even being out here on this raw edge was pretty bleeding edge at the time.
It was weird. Everybody was scared. Like, go away, Kevin. We don't want you here.
But I think that the point here is that on that spectrum, living building challenge, if you really want to be out there, that is one of those systems that is really in the mindset of, we don't want to participate in the system that's moving things along. We kind of want to shatter and drag everybody along with us. LEED goal has always been, let's kind of promote and motivate and encourage you. Whereas living building challenge says, in order to do this, you've got to meet everything. There are no exceptions. You're getting them all done in the storage. Where LEED was more of a rating system and continues to be, where you score some points out and you are modeling things that you think might happen. Living building challenge has always been like, you have to show us what it's doing once it is built.
So living building challenge has 7 petals that we dealt with. So site, water, energy, health, materials, equity, and beauty. And all of those are all based in sustainability. And they're all either terribly hard to achieve or not so bad. But the toughest one for us, I think, was materials, and we'll get into that a little bit more. You can go on to the next one.
One thing I do want to say about this, because to me this is what really makes me fall in love with this system. Where LEED feels more like an engineering exercise, living building challenge feels like a humanistic exercise, because you do have beauty, equity, things like that do not come up in a LEED program. So the idea that you care about what things look like and how people interact with your project, again, at the time, you know, we're talking 14, 13 years ago. I mean, that was like really revolutionary in our world, in kind of that building world. So I think that's another aspect that differentiates LBC and can be a differentiator between systems for rating building.
You can go on to the next slide. So once you start talking about these pieces, and we're giving you just some framework, and then we'll head into the Coke Center piece, and then what things you can do if you're not doing LBC, because we know that most people are not going to upgrade your facility to an LBC position, or you may be just doing a small outbuilding or something like that. We want to include that in there. But this is the label that we had on the side of my oatmeal box. This is the label that Living Building Challenge folks have come up with for products. There is a label out there now that if you have a product, there's a database you can go to, and it is Declare certified. You know that that company is being forthcoming with what is in their product, and they are being clean most of the time. But the most important thing for them is transparency. They're telling you what's in their product. We had to call every single manufacturer of everything. I mean, if you look in this room, there are 75 products that you can just see in this room. We had to call the manufacturer of everyone and get 100% ingredient label for all of them. And most of the salespeople have no idea what's in their products, by the way. They have no idea, and they're frustrated that you're asking them. But we're breathing the air in here. We're locked into this room. The windows aren't open. We're all breathing everything in here. We're touching the surfaces. This is becoming part of us right now. We have the right now. So Declare is that program that does that. You can go on to the next slide. So this is the red list. And we're just, again, giving you some context, and then we'll jump into stuff that makes a little more sense. This is the red list. So this is the list of chemicals that you're not allowed to have as a part of, in Living Building Challenge's mind, a healthy building. So these chemicals translate into about 700 different chemicals that you would see appearing in products. To make it simple on you, though, these were really the ones that were the hardest. These are the ones that you have to look out for. How many of you have PVC in your house? I have it in my house. You have it in your plumbing, probably. There's not a lick of PVC in the Coke Center building. How many have vinyl in your house? I mean, a lot of people have vinyl plank flooring in your nature facilities, things like that. BPA and phthalates were a really big thing about 10 years ago. People got freaked out about them, and now for good reason. They are endocrine, I mean, they're bad things. California banned solvents, what we talked about, like there are coatings on everything. Everything's coated. Everything's got a coating. It's slick and shiny and coated. And that all of that crap is usually toxic. It's not actually a great thing. So a lot of those solvents we had to watch out for. Formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is naturally occurring, but added formaldehyde is not a good thing. VOCs, we refer to it as the new car smell that so many, they're literally hanging things that you can get for your car that give you the new car smell, which is completely toxic. The new car smell is the VOCs. And that is why when you lay down new carpet, you should get the heck out of your house for several days and keep your windows open, things like that. So when you walk into the Coke Center building, Karen, what does it smell like?
People say it smells like nothing.
It smells like nothing.
Yeah.
And since the day it was open, it smells like nothing. There's nothing, which is the most delightful smell after you've gone through 8 years of vetting and trying to figure all this out. To smell nothing when you walk in your building. It's delightful. Toxic metals, you know, things like lead that they're still using, lead and things like that. Cadmium is another one. And then certain wood treatments. So arsenic, you know, they've gotten way better about arsenic, but there are a lot of wood treatments that you can't use either, a lot of varnishes and things. Again, it goes back to those VOCs usually. So our piece here is we're going to start in a list of things to help you make some of these decisions. Number one is you're probably not going to take that red list and go to a Lowe's and now start picking out anything that you're building any of your props with out of red list free materials, but you can pick a couple. So you can pick PVC, you can pick neoprene. I strap my kids in a neoprene life vest constantly. Turns out it's toxic too, but you can pick one and not get crazy about the others. And I think that's the important thing to do. Think about the things that you come into contact with a lot and say, okay, as a nature center or as a facility, can we make some general guidelines and policies for purchasing that say, when at all possible, if there's an alternative that is cost efficient as well, we're not going to use PVC. We're not going to run water through it. We're not going to, do things like that. So pick one and make that your thing. Okay, and don't get crazy about it, but pick one and try to slowly incorporate those things into your plans. You can move on. This one is me. Yep, this one's me. Sorry. So we're going to talk the rest of the time basically about how to think local and use your community to make your facility more sustainable or to make things in your facility more sustainable. These are two pictures that we're going to come back to. But I want you to remember this. That's a counter, and I want you to remember this. That's a metal sign. All right, you can go on. What slide number is that, by the way?
I don't know.
Go ahead.
mine.
It's yours. I know it's yours. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I think one of the interesting things, again, I've kind of got the biology background. My family actually is local contractors in the community. So I have a construction background. I grew up in a wood shop as a little kid. So I kind of knew all these components. What's interesting, though, is when you start talking about sustainability and you kind of start talking to contractors about, hey, we want to do this thing, when you're beyond, I'm just picking up stuff at Lowe's or Menards and trying to make better choices, the knowledge base is pretty thin in Indiana. I mean, when I try to call the contractor and say, I want to do this, can you help me? There's kind of a, you want to do what? Okay, What we found in the process of this was we were educating people from the ground up. I mean, we had sessions with local contractors, we had sessions with lumber yards, suppliers, just trying to help them understand what the process was. And I think the funny thing was, because I remember this one conversation we had about, this was before, today it's pretty ubiquitous that you put continuous insulation around the outside of the building. That's actually now a code requirement. At the time we built this, it was not. And I remember Daryl Shepard, who has been a contractor for 70 years and was helping on this project, saying, you want us to put the insulation where? Are you sure your drawings are right? I said, trust me, just put it there. That's where it's supposed to go. And the point to all that is, if you really want to do this on a budget, you really just need to find people who understand the materials, the purpose of why they're in the building, and just how to reorganize. A lot of times people get caught up on, I got to go buy this whiz bang magical system and put it in there. You really don't. I mean, we did not for the Cope Environmental Center building, and we did it about half the cost of what a typical sustainable building would be in terms of the living building. So again, a lot of this was, you need to make that decision about what do we care about. So for the Cope Center project, they cared about, we want to go all the way to the out there to Wall Edge. I can't count the number of people who say, can you help me do LEED Light? Can you help me do Living Building Challenge Light? Can you help us just be net zero? Can you help us be 20% better? Anywhere on that spectrum, I think is fine, in my opinion. As long as you're trying to make an effort, I think kudos. And how can you find that help? So I think it's making that decision early about where you want to go, creating your goal, and then just thinking creatively about how do you put stuff you would anyways in the building together a little differently to get there.
So we're going to use the Cope Environmental Center project as just a jumping off point for conversation for how we tackled a lot of these things and how they can translate to your facility or to your future facility. If you are young and searching for jobs, whatever, come in with this knowledge. I think it'll be really good. So the Cope building was certified living building in May 2021. As Kevin said, they did their first feasibility study in 2008. That is how long this project took. You do not have to take that long to do your project, but it's the first in Indiana and the 29th certified in the world. Okay, so this section is titled Who's Got What? Because we want to talk to you about how to assess your community and figure out how to reap the benefits from what your community already has. I would argue, and Kevin would probably agree with me because he did this morning, and if he changes his mind, he's in trouble, that the volunteers that we had on this project were by far the most valuable piece we had. They were the most valuable thing we found. So what we did, and I'll explain these pictures in just a second, is that we knew that we had a base of support in Richmond and throughout the country because Jim and Helen were, Jim was a professor, Helen was a teacher. So their students are everywhere. They're obsessed with them as teachers. Karen was one of them. She went to Earlham too. They love these people and they want to be helpful. But how do you get them to be helpful? Well, what we did is start asking around. Do you know people who are carpenters? Do you know people who could build some furniture for us? And you just start asking people. Do you know anyone? Do you know anyone? Turns out we found out that this guy is a cousin of the Copes and he's a master carpenter. And this guy who mows for us at Cope Center, turns out he also builds furniture, but nobody had asked him about it. This guy back here called us when he heard about the project and said, I'm a retired carpenter. I have a barn full of wood. Would you like it? And we thought we're gonna walk into a stack of walnut that post beetles have taken care of and there's no hope. We walk into a barn where every stack is labeled with when he cut it down and the species. It was all cut from his property, so it was all locally grown wood. And he said, here's my barn, take whatever you want. And the guys in there leaned over and they're like, we just hit the jackpot. So a lot of it post beetles had gotten to, but this barn right here, literally this what you're looking at turned into this, all of that. Any trim you see outside of the actual window casing turned into all of that.
And this is probably a good place, just backing up a little bit. There were a lot of conversations about, can we do this? The board saying, is this a good idea? And I believe one of the things I said to that group is we're going to throw ourselves off the cliff and make our parachute on the way down. And I say that because this is a perfect example. We had no clue from a budgetary standpoint or a material standpoint how we're going to make this happen. To find this was like $100,000 fine in terms of just a donation to the project. And it was not monetary by any means, but I mean, it offset that kind of cost. And these happened all the time. I mean, it was amazing what just came kind of percolated at the top of the community.
And if you look at this trim, there's some pinholes in it because there are insect holes in it. And because our standards for education were higher than our standards for a golf course type mentality, that won. And now we're able to show kids, so Karen's able to show kids, this is where an insect was. That's where this comes from. This comes from a tree. And you all know, because you're in environmental education, that the kids are getting more and more and more disconnected from where their stuff comes from. So the ability to show them too, that this is wood is imperfect. Turns out wood has knots. Did you know that? Probably not, because they pay for high grade wood that has no knots in it, which is kind of crazy, right? So teaching them that kind of thing, I think, was really important. It made use of existing products, so it was extremely sustainable. This was against LBC's rules. They had no rule for this. So what we did was then send them, LBC allows you to have a conversation. So we said, we have found a carpenter that has all this wood. Surely it is more sustainable for us to use this wood than for us to go out and buy FSC certified wood, right? And they said, yep, it is. Write up something and we will now make that a rule. So now that's a rule for LBC to use for other projects, as was the ash that was being decimated all over Indiana. So we took down our 3 biggest, tallest ash trees that were dead and had, again, more volunteers. So we asked around again, who has a wood miser? You wouldn't believe how many wood misers are in Richmond, or in Richmond alone, but in the state of Indiana, which is a portable sawmill. You have no clue how many of these things are out, like every other person has one. So a guy came in, he's retired, he sawed up 3 huge ash trees. We left him in the barn for a year, and there's all of our trim. There's a lot of the trim. The rest of it. So we were also able to control additives. When you buy that off the shelf, you have no idea what they pressured into it. So we were able to then, wood is getting better. Now you kind of know what's pressured into it, but we know now what is actually in that, what we'll be breathing when that goes into the facility. So when you're thinking about future projects too, how many of you have used wood to build something, whether it's a prop for a program or you've used it for a bridge or used it for anything? We use it constantly, right? So what if in the back of your mind you think, I'm going to start to think about how I can get just a constant supply of this from somebody? Ash is dead in a lot of Indiana, and we are not making good use of it. We want a lot of it to fall and be natural, right? But we also don't want a lot of it to go to waste. So it's a great thing. And then building a legacy. Those carpenters are forever tied to this building, and love that. This is yours. So sorry for the terrible picture, Karen. I meant to send you an email that I need a new picture, and I didn't do it in time.
And again, I think this is about, just what says who's got what, and the idea of back to kind of that label idea of what is in my building. Because, from my side of the world, a lot of our role is to ultimately specify products and to get those into buildings. I'll be honest, as a profession, we tend to be a little bit lazy. And by that, I mean, we just think about what's new. But the reality is there's not just like the what's new, like I'm going to go buy, this carpeting, put this in the building. And you're going to say, well, that's why I did get put into a building. I just brought the sample just to kind of show, this is a lot of times what we're doing is buying a thing off of the shelf. But the reality is, like Alison was talking, we get much more creative things. We'll find stuff like this from a waste stream. What this is a local artist, and this is for a library in North Minneapolis, who's putting these tiles together, and they're going to go into sidewalk. But again, I can't go find this off the shelf. This is where talking to your local folks, and really getting a feel for what's out there in the community and where the interest lies. You get stuff like this that you never could have imagined. Where like the sum is, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, because I never would have envisioned this. I can't go find this in a catalog. That having those conversations like we talked about earlier lead to this kind of creativity.
One of the pieces, while you're looking for another one that I don't want to forget about because I skipped, you saw that piece where I said, remember this piece, this is a countertop. That is a perfect marriage of the people in your community that can be a resource and then using what you have. So Pope Center, our facilities and grounds director out there is amazing. He can just do anything with everything. He had old deck boards, which we then reused. We laid down as a countertop, and then we look in our community. Who can wrap this? Can somebody wrap it and make an actual countertop? Turns out we have a company in Richmond that can use steel, where we can control the additives, where he just came in, wrapped it. It was a quarter of the price of an actual countertop. Just can't destroy it. No child can destroy this. So none of the kindergartners running on the countertops can destroy it. And that marriage actually made a functional product that was keeping things out of the landfill, that was reusing, and that was partnering with something local, very, very hyper local. Sorry. Go ahead.
Problem. The other are, what can we find that we can just kind of steal from something else that can be used on our project? Because I mean, this is kind of for me, with my interests, in sustainability. If I can remodel, reuse, not build something, I mean, that's going to be a more sustainable approach, honestly, than building something new a lot of times. Now, I say that knowing sometimes you can't really retrofit insulation and it seals really well. So sometimes there's a line as to what's the best thing to do. But this, for instance, was just coming out and like, they're just throwing this away. For me to get this recreated, I can't buy this. I can't buy these boards, I mean, I can't buy these profiles in this wood that would probably never rot even if you left it outside because it's just so dense and heavy. But again, we did similar things on this project, and we did these on a lot of projects where if you're just kind of immersed in the world that you're in, kind of find those contractors or those sources of stuff, there's always something coming down, there's some way to use it. So a perfect example for us is, this is a case of pellets. These are actually plastic pellets coming out. It's a little hard to see because they're moving so fast. But
Those are the bottle caps.
Yeah, the bottle cap. But I thought those were
Yeah, those
plastic
are the bottle cap. That's
Okay.
before it.
All right. So they're moving so fast, they look like pellets. Ultimately, what was done, so we in the Cope Environmental Center asked students, elementary age students, to bring in bottle caps that were going to actually be used on the building. At the time we started this process, we actually thought we were going to collab the whole outside of the building and siding created from that. We got a manufacturer on board, we thought, and this was going to be like, save us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ultimately, they said, we actually make parts for cars, not for houses or buildings, so we're not going to warranty this, and we're not comfortable with this. We were still able to take that material and have that same company make this product, and I don't have a piece of that, but it essentially looked about like this. They made boards, it looked like boards, that we then applied in the children's classroom. So this is actually a wall inside the building where the colors were added, and it was a play on the prairie and the sky and flowers, and there's kind of a green below this. So if you imagine the floor lines about here, and the idea that you kind of have different windows you can look out of. This is another case in my mind of where, I mean, you've had so many things going on. You've got the school-age children that are now tied to this project forever, and still to this day will drop stuff off trying to participate in this because they don't know that it really ever ended. And I think people just, this has been going on for like 15 years. So, but then it turned into this educational opportunity that like, look, these things can be upcycled, not just kind of downcycled into something less. To me, this is becoming something more. I'm not now just a bottle here. I'm actually a piece of this building that's helping keep the weather out. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen as often as it should. These things only happen when we really push for them. So I think the idea that the community is now tied into this and we were able to upcycle this much material to be a quarter of the classroom wall is pretty cool. We would have done more. It was actually a fire code issue at that point, only let you do so much. So we were only able to do that one wall. But I think it was a great opportunity to really connect the younger students into this who then have grown up in that facility.
I think also the neat thing, and this was Kevin's stroke of genius, was we didn't think about who in town makes really pretty planked things out of recycled content. Well, nobody does. Nobody in town made that. But who are our plastic companies? Let's start there. Richmond has a lot of plastic companies, unfortunately or fortunately, right? So what could they do? So we got them together. This is what we want to do. Do you have the ability to even do this? This person over here said we can flake it for you so we can bring the product, because bottle caps are not really the same composition as the actual bottles. The bottles are easier to recycle. The caps are a little tricky for the company. So if you can separate those out, you're actually kind of helping the stream stay a little bit cleaner. And they said, well, we can flake it for you. And the other company said, we can plank it for you. We'll just have to add some color. And we know those people. So we can say, turns out we also have a red list that we need to stay away from. So all the stuff you normally add, you can't add any of it. So can you come up with something that works, that you can do that is not, that helps us abide by the red list? And it worked. And it worked beautifully. So that was a cool thing. And I think the making use of existing systems that are local, the amount of transportation miles, because one of the big parts of LBC, Living Building Challenge, is the radius. The heavier the product, the closer you have to get it to home. So concrete, you have to get within 60 miles. You cannot go past 60 miles for concrete. And then it gradually gets bigger and bigger and bigger based on the weight of the product. So something like this, planks they can get really heavy. So we wouldn't have had very far to go to get these either. So you have to either find those systems or come up with them. And that was a struggle, but it came out, I mean, you know, it turned into these cool little pieces that go like this. Another thing of who's got what in our series of who's got what are retired facilities? We have a board member who used to own a gravel pit, but it's a retired gravel pit. So we said to her, do you have leftover gravel there? What happens when a gravel, but does somebody come and clean up the gravel? No, they just stopped producing gravel. And so there's tons of gravel still there. So they let us come in and truck out gravel so that new gravel was not being harvested for a lot of this project. Some of the gravel had to be harvested because not all of it was in great shape, but we're making use of an existing product, reducing the carbon footprint. But I think one thing that we don't do enough is slow down and ask people, okay, this is what we're looking for. Does anybody have connections? This is what we're looking at. And it's not just with your board members. It's with, you know, using social media. It's using all those kind of different, you know, we didn't have the luxury really of social media when we started this project because it wasn't really a big deal. But who's a retired person in town? Who's a retired chamber member in your community? Who is a retired manufacturing head in your community that every now and then you can sit down with and just say, here are the projects on my plate. I'm creating a new prop for this. I'm requiring reused lumber. I need new doors for my facility and I want to use barn doors. We used barn doors in a lot of the facility. They were reused from a board member's old barn. She just gave us stall doors. They've been sitting there forever. So who can I sit down with and be my person that helps me make connections to people in town? Okay. And a lot of times you're actually helping people out. Those barn doors have been in a stack of unused wood for a long time. She was ready to get them out of the barn anyway. So we have culverts that we got from a local place that doesn't make culverts anymore. This was just a leftover piece for our playscape. Stuck it in there. He's thrilled to pieces because it was just laying out in the middle of nowhere. And now this culvert is being used by kids and they're going in and out of it all the time. All right, you can go on to the next one. This one was a really important one. Kevin and I will kind of tag team this one. We used a lot of schools from the beginning to the end, and you should too. And here's why. We have in Indiana an abundance of extremely smart people in our universities that know a ton about sustainability. And three of the best examples are Purdue, IU, and Ball State. So Ball State has CERES, which is an energy Center for Environmental ridiculous sustain, but I don't know what it stands for. I can't remember, and Bob Custer will kill me that I can't remember, but Bob Custer runs the CERES department, and they can help with energy modeling. They can help with airflow. They can help with all of these wonderful things. And he's just sitting there. He's probably one of the greatest energy experts in the state right now, wouldn't you say? He won't tell it. He won't say that, but he's sitting there waiting to help people. We have Indiana and Purdue that both have incredible sustainability programs, but also climate programs that can be helpful. And we don't utilize these people enough, and they want to partner with the community. In fact, as a grant writer, I know that a lot of their grants rely on them partnering with the community. So you can help them reach their help them get to where they're going. And Alisa is actually a professor as well. Is that true that partnering with the community is encouraged by everybody? So this project was, this is our ash once in it. That wasn't in the bark. So this is our old ash wood. This is our Richmond construction technology class at Richmond High School. We think, and we'll have to ask LBC, that this is the first high school associated with a Living Building Challenge project in the state. But we said we need bathroom partitions, and turns out bathroom partitions even have a bunch of crap in them. They're loaded with toxins. It's just, they're everywhere.
Is that a pun?
That was, it is a pun. I hate that this is being recorded. Those bathroom partitions. So what if we just made them out of our ash and our solvent, or the coating that we know is clean? What if we use that? And then, so who's going to build it? Our carpenters are exhausted. They're doing all the trim. They're having to get everything ready. And so we called them and said, are you guys up for a project? And he's like, yeah, we have to, some of the time we're building stuff that's fake because there's nothing to, so they took on this project. Do you want to do notes about how that all worked?
Well, I want to pile on a little bit more about our educational institution. I think there is the higher ed, and I think, we ended up using IU for their chemistry department. We used Miami University for their architectural department. We used Ball State for their architectural department. We used Purdue for some engineering stuff. We used Ivy Tech. So don't forget your trade schools, because again, they are like happy to pile on this stuff. I mean, and I went in and kind of did 1 or 2 classes even to Ivy Tech just to educate them on what we're doing and kind of give them a kind of a bump up on what is sustainability, how does this work. And they were happy to jump in and actually help us do some of this research. And because that's one of the big things that we learned in this process. If you really want to do this kind of living, building challenge, at that end of the spectrum where you're kind of at that raw edge of sustainability, you end up with the potential for a list about this big of consultants. I mean, that was one of the shocking things for me, because I kind of considered myself, well, I need to know a lot about everything so I can be engaged. We were first trying to tackle this. I mean, people had 20, 30 consultants on these things. And the reality is most of your budgets aren't going to be able to support that. So that is where we kind of came up with this harebrained idea that actually worked of, utilize these higher ed institutions. I mean, it's a win-win. The students get the opportunity to work on a real project. You get the resource of, free labor. I mean, that sounds terrible, but it's true. But again, it's almost having, what's that one? An internship, where you bring people in. So you're both getting something out of that process. And in the same way, it just further tied the community and invested them in this project. So I think, again, I can't overstate how helpful those groups can be, because then they ultimately are typically tied to, we've got an alumni who knows even more stuff or has something else. So it kind of grows out from those points in the community.
And again, the sustainability piece comes in from the local construction, the local sourcing, and your control. You are controlling it. So you can control the miles, the carbon miles. You can control the solvents. You can control the stuff that's going on things. When you have control over that, the sustainability factor just shoots up through the roof, and your cost goes way down, because you are not paying for the really shiny, high-priced, sustainable thing on Amazon that you could be buying, right? You're putting the folks there. And this doesn't have to be about a whole building. So many of you are doing nature playscapes right now. You're building props for programs. We had a volunteer carpenter make all new snake enclosures out of the reused wood. So we're having people use the materials that we have, giving truly actually a gift to them of, please be involved in this. We would love for you. They give the gift back to us. It worked out really nicely. So I would argue that any project that you are coming up with, whether it is a porch swing made out of your ash, that is, you want to be able to charge a phone when it swings. I don't know. Throw that at the trade school, right? So build those relationships. And as a person that's spent my life fundraising, that's the key, right? Build those relationships, because these guys, when they get older, I'm hoping they come back and they feel some type of thing like, I did that. That was me. I did that. And maybe a future donor as well. You can go on to the next one. So then there's energy. So I imagine that several of you may have thought that this probably would be all about energy and all about energy consumption. And it truly is, because actually every material you use will either help you conserve energy in the building, or it's going to take energy. And so this was a big thing for us. And this was a lot of what Kevin and Ball State were tasked with doing. The building is insanely insulated. But we wouldn't have known that in Indiana, Knauf Insulation out of Shelbyville produces extremely sustainable insulation. They are part of the Living Building Challenge. They have stuff on Declare. That's Indiana. So we get down on Indiana about sustainability, but we have these hidden gems everywhere. We just don't. We're Midwesterners. We don't brag about them very often, right? So automatic lighting, I talk about how things are a little too automated. Sometimes I'm sure Karen fights with this a lot, where you're like, we're conservationists. We're not going to leave the lights on. Just let us control the lights. But that kind of stuff happens. The roof color, light roof colors, airflow, building positioning, which Kevin will talk about in a second. The building is run on solar panels that control a geothermal system and a hot water. No, wait. What's our flooring? Radiant floor heating and cooling. So we have concrete floors with radiant floor heating and cooling, which is a little different. But the solar panels help. But the thing that I think is most interesting that has to do with all of these can be on a small shed or they can be on an entire facility. And Kevin and Ball State kind of figured out a unique piece of our building that most people aren't used to, still aren't used to.
So this is where I am going to make a plug for including people like myself in your process. And you know, you have to pay us half the time. I mean, half the time someone picks up the phone and says, "Hey, what do you think about?" You know, usually we're willing to answer the question, especially people that have worked on projects like this. To this day, the engineers that worked with me on this project say this is one of the most fun projects they were ever involved with. I mean, these are people doing facilities at Purdue and big time things. So again, I think there's an energy to this of being willing to help you when you pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I want to do a funky thing on this shed, some test, project. Will you help me figure out how to wire it up?" Sure, what the heck. But to kind of tie some of this all together, and this is why I brought this up earlier about the cost thing. Ball State was very helpful in the series department in terms of figuring out, how to ultimately what we want to do is how small can we make the footprint of this. I mean, that's where I'm advocating for finding people who can help you figure some of this stuff out because it's not intuitive. So, the building's kind of set up in a fairly intuitive way. I mean, you're seeing a lot of windows here, not a lot of windows there. The idea is, I want my south views. I want to get, the sun to come in and warm up that nice floor slab that I've got in there during the winter, but not so much during the summer. So there's actually a little overhang, so it's hard to see there. What Bob Kester was able to do in the series department was digitize this thing. So just so you can laugh at me, this is the process of architecture. We play games with little models. This is how it started.
And I said, we don't want that building. That is ugly.
And again, this is more to capture the concept. It was the idea that there is the main building where they want to do events and adults go. There's the children's building. There's this tree, that kind of has some meaning with the founders and things in the middle that kind of ties this campus together. We don't have enough money, we don't think, to even tie the buildings together because we're really tight on funds. So it'll be organized in two separate buildings. We finally figured out how to actually tie it together with the connector. But again, you can kind of see where that came to. But the point is, in that process, is we're kind of honing and figuring this out, especially again, trying to minimize how much of this do we have to buy, how much is it going to take to keep cool, light, all those things. You really have to get in the weeds of, all right, how many windows do I have on the west side of the building? Because those really take a beating in the late afternoon sun. I don't want any of those. And the same thing, how big does that overhang have to be so that during the summer, I'm not getting a ton of sunlight right there. This building got skewed off about 12 degrees from south. And the whole reason is Bob Kester series. They took this building and said, "Let's do this, let's do that," inside their little digital model. So they were able to run it through a whole year cycle of the heating, cooling, the sun, and what's it doing. They ultimately helped tell us what size do these windows need to be. Now it's a little bit of a trade-off. We said we really want the kids' space to be kind of playful and fun, and we really want that main. This is actually kind of where you walk and get into the rooms that are back in here. We want that to feel really open to the site. So then we kind of have some guidelines that you need to tell us at what point does it start becoming such a penalty with what we're putting in there that it doesn't make sense from an energy budget standpoint. So this is where it all starts to come together, kind of the play of these little objects, the experts that you can bring in from some of your educational institutions to ultimately get to the end goals, which again is for all of us, how small can we make the footprint? How low can we make the cost and still get to the goals we want of being able to educate people and do the programs we love to do?
Bob Kester at Ball State, it is the Center for Energy Research, Education, and Service. So just so you know, and a great resource for you to use for anything. So conservation was the key. You all know this. It's better to conserve energy than produce new energy. You all know that. We don't have to preach that to you. But I think one of the most telling things when you drive up to the building is it's crooked, and it starts the conversation then with people about, well, why isn't it facing the road? And then you ask, well, why does it need to face the road? We don't care what the road thinks about our building. We care about, and then Kevin came up with a really neat design of the driveway that uses the existing driveway, but then brings you in so you can see the really pretty side of the building first. And then you kind of come around and park and you see this building is crooked, and you have that in your eye, and then you learn about it through signage in the building. I am going to, before we get to our last slide, I'm going to tell you that if you would like, you can put your name and email address here, and I will share the interior signage, the interpretive signage that goes in the building that teaches you about each piece of it, so that you can maybe grab some of that and use it in your facility in some way. Karen, is that okay with you if I share the interpretive signage with everyone? Karen's the director. I should have asked you that. That was stupid, but okay, is that all right? Sorry. Yeah, so you can put your email address on there and we can share that with you and share with you some of the photos, but that interpretive signage is a good place for you to start to say, oh, I didn't think about that. Maybe that's something we should think about for XYZ project. And again, this is from program props all the way up to full building. So I'll leave that up there next to the evaluation thing. All right, last slide. Okay, so what can you do moving forward? Our hope is that you will start small, pick a few important standards, and then stick to them. Stick to them is the important thing. And I think that's what LBC made us do, made us mad, but made us do, is stick to it. You can't get around it just because it's hard. So there are several standards. One of the easiest ones, and I'm going to not get political, but get a little political here, is Made in USA. Across political spectrums, it's a great thing, right? So everybody, if you're an environmentalist, you're probably thinking about it in terms of the radius and how close to home. If you're thinking about, being patriotic and supporting American-made products, the Made USA label, to look for that and just say, for environmental reasons and to support local economies, we're going to try to use Made in America for as many products as we possibly can. The carbon miles obviously goes way down with that. FSC certified and SFI. SFI does a lot of environmental education support too, but they are an industry supported standard. So they're their own standard. So they're their own wood standard. FSC is separate from the wood industry. So it's kind of more of a watchdog type of standard. Does that make sense? I mean, is that the best way to describe it?
Sort of. And I guess that I'll just as a sidebar to all of this, I think that is one of the points to this, even today, Fair and all these other, there's so doggone many systems and what do they all mean? I think that's where you can pick up the phone and ask somebody, get some help with this stuff. Because that was one of the things we ran into with Living Building Challenge, for instance, is they did not recognize SFI. They would not accept that. So you can kind of get down a path too far to where it's kind of hard to back up. So again, collecting that information, getting help, depending on what your goal is, and that's where knowing your goal at the beginning is important, so you know which of these matter to you. Because we learned during this project, it's very hard to back up and recreate something you didn't get right or track from the beginning. So
declare label, using that declare label, or red list free items. So study that red list a little bit, kind of think about the things that maybe you could start with. Is it vinyl? Is it PVC? Polyvinyl chloride, the PVC, we learned at our building opening. A guy flew up from Texas. He was from Tyler Pipe. We had used his iron piping throughout the building. And he said, we are considered in firefighters, it's extremely important that buildings that have, sorry, I'm saying this wrong. Firefighting is much safer on buildings that don't have PVC in them, because that chlorine gas is not only coming at them when the fire is being fought, but it is also sticking in their suits and staying with them for a very long time, and they're breathing it in. So he had a cool little video that said, did you know that by doing this, by switching it out with iron pipes, you're actually, if the building ever were to tragically have a fire, actually helping to help with even the firefighters on that. So you're not only helping that occupant health, but it's just kind of a cool little side piece. So picking a few of them, maybe it's PVC that you're going to work on keeping out. Maybe it's vinyl, whatever. Maybe you go with one of these programs. If you're truly thinking about building a building, call one of us. We will not force you to use Kevin as an architect or anything. We just want to help you make decisions. So call one of us and we can help you with that, because we screwed up enough to help you. So,
and the one thing I will say, just before she just about wrap up,
sorry.
If you really are serious about, because like I mentioned earlier, we get calls for and questions of, can we do LEED? Well, LBC Light, which means we're going to not really, go through the whole process. I mean, if you're serious, you really need to stick to that system and go through with it, because to Alison's point, it's real easy to say this got hard. We're just going to kind of go around that and ignore that. And we kind of did it LBC Light. Well, did you really? That is one of the things, having done, all of these systems on different buildings, sticking to it and really forcing yourself to go through it. I mean, yes, it's a challenge, why it's called Living Building Challenge. The Lord knows I could have gotten a lot more sleep had we not done that system. But everybody involved learned stuff, kind of grew through the process, and I think it made a better project at the end. We had to come up with creative solutions to solve whatever was in our way at the time. So I would advocate for if you're taking on a major project and you really want to say we did what we did, I would say find whatever system fits with your philosophy, whatever your goal is, and really try to stick to it. Because it will make a big difference versus doing a light version where you don't. So.
And you can go back to that pedal page where it had all the pedals, the site, water, health, energy, and you can say, all right, we're gonna focus on water. We're just gonna focus on water. We're gonna look at LBC standards, and we're gonna try to meet LBC standards with just water, or we're gonna do it with just, they're net zero. They have a net zero building certification too. So we're just gonna focus on energy or just materials. So doing it that way is also kind of an achievable way. This is LBC is a program for neighborhoods. It's a program for buildings. It's a program for rehabs. So they have a lot of different pieces to it. But stick with it. Have a mentoring buddy. Have me. Give me your list of what you're sticking to, and then I'll bug you to make sure you're sticking to it. And then you'll have to explain if you're not sticking to it, and that'll help you stick to it, right? That's what LBC did for us. So we have just a few seconds left, or 3 minutes left. If anybody has any questions. We can take those, but we also have materials up here. Kevin can show you. They're getting better. They're starting to put labels on stuff. They've learned from enough people asking that they're going to have to get better at that. So he can show you some of the ingredient labels that you'll start to see and what all of those symbols look like over here in these materials. But does anybody have any questions before we're done? Yep.
I just want to say how amazing this is to have this in our community, and I can't tell how many trips I've taken, to show the amazing attributes of this building. One of the things that I still remember are the refractive lights in the ceiling.
Solar
Just make use of, yeah. And I guess maybe it's more of a comment than a question. How far away we have gotten from what building log cabins just 150 years ago. I mean, the fact that you had to kind of go through all these steps just to make a door or things made out of wood again. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
frustrating that 150 years later or whatever. I mean, this is so foreign to us to just take down a tree and make it into a door.
Yeah.
I any comments on that? I mean, I'm just flabbergasted that has become a goal and something that is so far removed from what we want to do now.
We said a lot during this process. It shouldn't be this hard to make a non-toxic building. It should be way harder. You should have to prove why you have to have a toxic building.
Yeah.
Why do you have to have toxins in there? Why does it have to be unsustainable? Why do you need that product from 4,000 miles away? You explain to me that because it shouldn't be that hard. It's just the same thing with organic eating too. Why is it so hard and expensive to eat food that hasn't been poisoned? Come on, we've really flipped our systems. And I think the most important part to that was asking the companies and being annoying. I think that helped. And it is starting at, even Caitlin, our lead better, knew, she said at the beginning of the project, she'd get a lot of sighs over the phone. She'd get a lot of people frustrated with her. We had one company try to charge us $200 to find out what was in their product. And it was not proprietary information. They just didn't want to do the work because the guy didn't know what was in his product. We didn't pay that bill, by the way. But, and then she said by the end, people started to have information kind of ready for her. So the industry is changing because people keep asking. People are going through these programs, they're bugging people, and they're saying, we as consumers are not okay with this anymore. You can't do this. You can't do this to the planet, can't do it to our health. So let's get better.
But I think the bigger kind of point to me is you've got to advocate for what you want. I mean, if you don't, you're going to get better living through chemicals. You're going to get what they want to market to you. So the systems are there, the information is there. Again, everybody's kind of fallen into a different mode of operation, and you've got to just push back to get to the outcome you want to have at the end of the day. And it's achievable. I agree, it should be this hard, but unfortunately, we've fallen into some of these norms that aren't healthy, and we just got to kind of push back and like the food and everything else. So,
Jamie, you had a question?
I'm curious about the maintenance. Is it more maintenance? And it might be a question for tomorrow.
Yeah, Karen could answer that. I can put in our 2 cents that the HVAC system has been, at the beginning, was a lot to figure out. But I've also been on 3 building projects lately, and the HVAC system, whether it was a green building or not, was always the hardest sticking point for both at that time and the maintenance afterwards. We're actually,
And I would
yeah.
weigh in on that for
Yeah,
just a second,
go ahead.
because codes have changed now to the point all this automation nonsense that we have is code minimum. Like you have to put that stuff in. If you don't, we're going to file for a variance. So it's just interesting that in that move towards, this is almost like the commercial industry making products and trying to make it better, they've kind of made it harder. I can't just go flip the switch really. And I mean, sadly, on this project, we went to other buildings where they were even more complicated, and we dialed that as far back as we could to just be like, we're code minimum. Because we want switches for stuff, yet it still continues to be a challenge. And there's just really no way around that again, unfortunately.
But
So,
the materials, Jamie, I mean, part of the reason we chose a lot of the materials too was for simplicity. The ground is concrete throughout the building, because why wouldn't you do it? We have, 10,000 kids going through every day, or not every day. My God, that would be awful. Hopefully here, none of the 10,000 going through every day, but like just that, the stainless steel on that counter, the wrap we put on there, the wood. I mean, these are just tough, tried and true materials that are not complicated. We're not putting up these beautiful like screen things and just leave all that out. And the key was simplicity, because this is also a Quaker community and our founders were Quakers, and glitzy was not okay with them. So this is probably as far as we could get to glitzy without being shiny, right? It's just like they weren't about the sparkles. It's all about simplicity. And the building is very simple. And I will throw some pictures into that folder too, so you can see the inside. It's a very simple but beautiful building. It's not clouded with a lot of stuff to make the maintenance a nightmare.
and I will say too, that most of these programs like LVC, well, even LEED now have maintenance programs that need to be a part of that. So you have to kind of show what you're going to use, what your processes are as part of that, so that it is again a holistic look on stuff. Sorry to keep cutting you off.
I think there are a couple things
Like
like,
you're going to weigh in on how easy it was.
No, I don't disagree with
Okay.
anything you said. There's nothing, because nothing in terms of the maintenance that is because of the rebuilding. The things that are hard are an HVAC system that is automated, and it's taking us forever to actually learn how to use it and get into the computer, and that has nothing to do with it.
Yeah,
The
that's just
other thing,
2021.
it just- and the
Right.
other thing that is totally hard was what there's a maintenance nightmare for us is something kind of code issue. It's not an LVC issue at all. The door.
yeah, the door.
How did your conversation go with the building inspector, getting that signed off? Like, was there a lot of prep work beforehand? And then what is your exterior waterproofing? Your roof and your siding?
Our roofing is metal. Our siding is hardy plank, which is fiber cement board, which is virtually indestructible. So both of those are
That's actually what this
great.
is.
That's what that is. I said this during our building celebration we had this year, is that I think we had a huge advantage of being in a small town. And I would rarely say that about the resources we had, but we knew people. We knew the inspector. We knew all the building people. And that's not to say we're like, hey, let us by, but they're willing to take our call and sit down with us and try to figure things out. So I think most of the time, the water pedal was the hardest for us in terms of that, because Indiana was willing to let us be a little flexible with our water processing and do a sand mound. But the local people said, we spend tens of thousands of dollars tearing out these sand mounds. You don't want to do that here. This is not going to work. You're going to tear it out. It's going to fail on you. And the inspector, the Centerville guy was like, I mean, we'll let you do it, but if it fails, you got to tie right back into our system. And it's going to fail. And the contractor who was going to make money off it said, it's totally going to fail. You should not, don't put this in. So those type of things, I think, were made so much easier because we were in a small town and we were able to sit down and say, hey, Randy, do you have time to sit down with Bob and Sally over here? And we all sit down and made it work. So there were systems like that. And Living Building Challenge, the thing that they want you to do is try. So we worked our tails off to get a really good on-site waste processing system. And ultimately we had to tie into the system, but they said, you did everything you possibly could. You worked through all the systems, you pushed back against the state, you pushed back against the city, you did all of it, and just the stars couldn't align. And so we got an exemption for it because it was, we probably did more effort to get that and to made people think differently than we did for some of the vetting, which was, technically
Where you want to step there?
harder. We are tied into their sewer, but we pull from a well, but the system is set up so that we could switch basically a valve and have our own system. So it is ready, prepped for a system when the state gets a little more happy with constructed wetland type of systems that are
Or septic.
for septic.
So let me totally dork out here, 'cause that's what I do. So there's kind of three kind of
Sit
levels.
back and get comfortable.
Yeah, well, I'm
Just
gonna be-
kidding.
I'm gonna be-
Ask the question.
I'm
No, I'm
gonna be
joking.
more-
All we
Maybe
have
more
is lunch, so.
Yeah, we have lunch and it
So
is
then I need to go
11:20.
to school.
Yeah, so if you're.
need
Because I
to
can
leave.
report. But just to be a little more specific answer to your question, just so everybody knows, when I do a commercial project in Indiana, I gotta go through 2 levels at least. I gotta go through the state of Indiana and get my permit there. Once that gets approved, then it goes to my local code officials. So that could be the county or the city and sometimes both in what they call the 2-mile fringe where those 2 zones overlap. So I'm in at least 2 jurisdictions, if not 3. And then kind of my third tier is this rating system. If you're using something like that, I got to answer to. So back to your question about codes at the state level, the only thing we had to have a conversation about was the water. And what we started out trying to do was actually a wetland treatment system. And we were going to steal that from another LBC project in Pennsylvania. But the state of Indiana said, heck no, we won't go. And we did. We sat in a lot of meetings over in Indianapolis trying to get that through. I mean, testing, we said we could test it, test on this other facility. It shown it was like cleaner than the water coming out of the well. They just would not go there. So that's where we pushed ourselves then towards the mound system. And again, as Allison alluded to, then that failed locally. So that was really the only thing we ran into. Everything else was pretty vanilla in terms of the state. I mean, there wasn't anything that kind of got anybody excited. The only other thing at the local level that got people excited is there's a requirement to pave anything and everything that was a park surface or driveway. So we did have to file for an exemption on that to allow it to just be gravel parking out there.
Because
And-
LBC wants permeable surfaces.
yeah, so, and again, gravel's not as permeable as grass. There's kind of the spectrum of what's permeable. But that allowed us to kind of drop that down. It's at a fraction of what obviously paved or concrete surfaces to actually allow water to percolate in. So that allowed us to shed a lot of requirements for, trying to move water around for like stormwater type things with percolating in. But those were really the only 2 things at that kind of permitting level that we had to deal with. Everything else was compliant with codes. Then the other things we ran into were, like Allison alluded to, the LBC requirements, which again, you're going to get into depending on what system, if you're trying to hold something, are to meet whatever those requirements are. So LBC requires water to come out of the ground, water to go right back into the ground and not leave the site. So that's what she's referring to. We had to file for an exemption on that. It's the fact that because we couldn't do that mound and recharge the aquifer by doing a mound or a septic or a wetland, they wanted to put it in a pipe that goes back to the water treatment plant down the road. That was not allowed. But the fact that we tried, we went through everybody trying to get to the right answer, that's just a more sustainable answer, making the right answer in this case. They said, fine, we'll let you get away with it and still certify the building. So if there's anything we actually failed at, and not for lack of trying, but did not accomplish, is that with the water for the LBC certification. Again, that's not a code issue. That's just an LBC thing. And that's why that spectrum of where do we fall on that matters. This code, not an issue. Out here trying to be sustainable issue. So it's ultimately what's the goal. Did that answer? All right.
Any other questions?
And I'll throw out too, if anybody has any additional, wants to know anything, I'm happy to talk or follow up.
Are you gonna be here for lunch?
Sure.
All right, be here for lunch. Well, thank you so much. That was great.